Hello there and welcome back to another Friday night. I am Rafael di Furia, back at it again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter to talk a bit more about life abroad, living abroad, Italian dual citizenship, and living life in Italy. And this week, I wanted to talk about how living abroad has changed me, more specifically Italy. I have been in a couple of countries, but Italy is definitely the one that has made the biggest impact on my life and has really changed the way that I perceive things around me. But just before we get too much deeper into this, if you would like to see more content like this about moving to Italy, Italian dual citizenship, and living life abroad, be sure that you are subscribed to this YouTube channel for more content like this. Of course, also, I am launching a new project on March 2nd, 2021. I messed that up last time, but March 2nd, 2021. On that Tuesday, I will be launching a new series of content that will be posted here on YouTube as well as to the audio podcasting platforms. And also, of course, a huge thank you to the patrons who make this content possible through patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria or RafaelDiFuria.com/Patreon. It's because of you guys that I am able to continue with this project. So deeply from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. But anyway, let's get into the rest of the video. The first thing that I would say has made such a major difference in the way that I think about life and living is how things are often done here in Italy and using more outdoor space and spending more time outside. And I'm not necessarily talking about going up into the mountains and hiking and thising and thating. I'm talking about going down to the piazza. And the piazzas here very often are used as this communal living space, like a living room of sorts. Just especially here where I live in a smaller Italian city, you have so many different people that will just jump onto the piazza, sit drinking their aperitivi, and the kids will be playing out on the piazza, and the parents will be checking in, looking over them to make sure that they're doing okay, but also to slow down. That is another part of life in Italy that I will talk about, but even to just take that time to relax and slow down. Enjoy that meal with your family. Enjoy that drink with your friends, to just sit and have a coffee and not rush to the next thing that you're trying to get to. Of course, you can do that, and Italians do rush around like anybody else. But there's also much more of an appreciation here that you just find is so innately entangled into Italian culture and Italian life. But just because I'm also a foodie, I also just wanted to talk about one other thing that has to do with meals in Italy, and that's eating later. Growing up as an Italian American in the United States, we always tended to eat a bit later than most of my friends ate their dinners growing up. But ever since moving to Italy, I can say that dinner time that I had has getting pushed later and later. And even I think I've mentioned in my videos before, when I was in Sicily, there was one evening that I was there with some Sicilians and some other people who were there. And we were saying, okay, we're going to go to dinner. Let's organize this. And the Sicilians said, okay, we'll see you at 10 o'clock tonight. I was like, holy crap, what? 10 o'clock tonight for dinner? I mean, hey, if that's what you do, then that's what you do. And so we went out 10 o'clock that night, had a beautiful meal. I probably didn't get back until 1 in the morning. But not that I'm saying that that's even so normal. But of course, in the summer or when the weather is hotter and the further south you go, the later that Italian dinner time will be. In the north, it ends up being a little bit earlier. But I mean, we're talking about any time between, I guess, 6:30, 7 o'clock. And that's early, even in the north, some places, until maybe 8, 9, 10 o'clock, depending on the time of the year, and of course, depending where you are. And this doesn't go for everybody. And there will be people from the north of Italy who look at people from the south of the Italy and how late their dinners are. And it's just, how could you wait that long? No, dinner has to be earlier. But of course, very likely has to do with a number of factors, natural factors of maybe such as how late it stays light, or even the weather, or all these different kinds of things that will end up having this little natural effect on the culture at large. And another thing that's changed my approach to hanging out with friends has been that public outdoor living space that is so common here in Italy. Growing up in the States and spending time with friends there, it was always, you go to someone's house and it would end up always being the discussion, whose turn is it? When are we going to whose place or whatever? That always annoyed me because I really didn't care. It's like, if we want to go to one place, we go to one place. If you want to come to my place, we come to my place. But like, whatever. But here in Italy, because apartments and living spaces, generally speaking, are so much smaller, and that's why so many people will end up living the social part of their life out and about and maybe won't welcome as many people into their home. I mean, I remember having plenty of people come over and having like 20 or 30 people, and it wasn't like a big deal because like the space was there. So why not have a bunch of people over? But here in Italy, you'd maybe be very lucky if you could fit maybe 8 or 10 people into such a small space. Not that all Italian apartments are tiny, but it's a different approach that people have here in Italy. And I've noticed also the likelihood of somebody inviting another person to their home is much lower in some ways, unless they're like super, super close, almost like family. And maybe there would be a slightly different approach to inviting somebody to your home in the United States, that even if you know them a little bit less, if everybody else is coming over anyway, so just invite them too. But of course, I'm not saying everybody's throwing parties of 20, 30 plus people, but it's more likely that you might at least have that space in a backyard, which again is something else that's not also that common here, but people do have them. Even in the small town where I live, even though most people live in apartments, there are some standalone homes that do have yards. This next one is still something that I am getting used to, and especially because of the 2020-2021 life that we've been living through. This has been even more of a change as well. And space, personal space, personal distances, that personal bubble that so many of us grow up with in North America. This idea, I remember it being talked about in school, like, oh, keep your arms to yourself, stay at arm's length away from the next person, and like all these kinds of like little things about like just having that space in between people. And from an American perspective, yeah, it's a bit more practical because we do happen to have that space. But in Italy, that ends up being something that's so completely different, because Italians have a much higher population density than what we would normally see in the United States. And also the country is much smaller. We're talking about a country the size of California here. And even in this smaller landmass that we call Italy, there are a lot of different cultures and languages and dialects that people do speak. And so everything is very, very close by. And it's very common in Italy that people will live in apartment buildings, even in a smaller place, more than they would live in a standalone home. And in my opinion, this is one of the reasons that kind of contributes to Italians being much more okay with being close. Or I guess you could even argue maybe that they're so okay with being so close to each other that they're okay with living in much closer quarters. But of course, this has to do with European history and also the lack of cars throughout the history, whereas in the United States, where it's a much younger part of the world and more recently built up, and a lot of it has been built around the advent of cars or the necessity of cars. So you'll have cities that are built around being able to drive around the city, whereas maybe you'll find European cities where it's more built for walking or even horse and buggies or horse and carts kind of traffic, rather than the big streets that we might see in other parts of the world. Although definitely if you go to different countries around Europe and different cities, you will find some of these massive streets that can handle a lot of cars because they have modernized or have been able to adapt their city to modern car life. So for me, even coming to Italy and getting used to this close quarters kind of space has been an adjustment. And there have been times where I've been in a conversation with somebody and they'll get like right up in my face, like I'm not joking, like pre-COVID, like very, very close, especially if we were in a loud situation. And my first gut reaction was to take a step back. But then I noticed that there were people who took this as almost a rude gesture, and they became a little bit colder as soon as I did that. But for me, it was mostly actually because of my vision. The reason why I stood back, it wasn't because of even personal space, but because of my vision. Like I couldn't actually physically see the person, even though I'm nearsighted. It was so close that I was like, hey, like let me back up just a second so that your face can become clear and you're not just this one big blur to me, even with glasses on. But that's something, like I said, I had to adjust to and make sure that I didn't just jerk back and pull back. That wasn't my first gut reaction. But because of COVID, this has changed a lot of little bits and pieces of life in Italy and Italian society that end up actually being quite major. And even I've been in a number of rooms on the Clubhouse app speaking with Italians and hearing what they had to say about how they are just missing going to kiss people on the cheeks or to hug people or to touch people, because Italians are much more touchy-feely than maybe your average American might be or average North American might be. Other than maybe the Latin part of North America, like Mexico, for example, where there's much more passion and liveliness and loving that's expressed in a very different way than what we might experience in maybe the US or Canada. And even for me, meeting somebody for the first time and getting kisses on the cheeks from somebody who I don't know, they just happen to be a friend of a friend, it's honestly a little odd for me. Even we could be saying it's a beautiful woman. It's still like, hey, I don't know you like that. Like, why are you getting so close? But like, it's one of those things that you just end up getting used to. But now with COVID, Italians are definitely keeping their distance and not doing the cheek kissing. And maybe they'll be going for the elbow touch, like, hey, how you doing? But of course, even, I don't know, that one I don't totally get. And I don't know if it's something that's just here in Italy, but I would assume other places also do it. But you get pretty close if you're bumping elbows, much closer than if you're shaking hands. But of course, if you're touching hands, whatever. But of course, shaking hands and what that can lead to, even in a non-COVID world, I won't even go into it. But what I can say I've seen here in Italy is that the idea of social distancing, even when it was enforced that you had to be 1.5 meters or 2 meters away, that definition kind of became a little flexible at times, unless you were in like a train station with police around. But even in supermarkets or stores, or even just walking around towns, that definition has been a bit more flexible than what I've seen and heard about in other countries. Even though Italians do wear masks, unlike some other parts of the world, and they're very serious about the mask usage, the distance, it's a little bit of a different concept, just like it's always been in Italy. So even though things have changed a lot, in some ways they haven't changed at all. But another point to do with distance, and not about personal distance in this case, but about distances between locations. That is something that has really changed for me. And even in regards to travel, like the idea, especially not having a car, but from going from my town to another town seems kind of like a big deal in some ways. Whereas maybe that 1.5-hour trip that I would have to take from here to wherever might just be the equivalent time-wise, maybe not distance-wise, but time-wise of getting from one side of a city to another side, or barely making it around the block, depending on how much traffic it is in your city. And even though Austria isn't so far away from where I live, in some ways it just feels like this whole separate faraway place that I don't have the desire to go and really schlep to get to, so to speak, because it's just over there. It's such a big trip away. But in reality, the train trip wouldn't be too bad. It would take maybe a day to get there. So not that bad. Even in a car, it wouldn't be too bad. But it's just one of those things that for me, like especially growing up, we went up and down the West Coast all the time. And as a kid, I didn't even think about it. Seattle to San Francisco or to LA, like all of these big, longer road trips were things that were just kind of normal. I hated them. I didn't like them at all, but it was just kind of the norm because the United States is much more of a car-centric society. And of course, people do drive here. It's not like people don't drive, but when you're living in some cities and towns, owning a car either can be very expensive, which it is in general, or it can be annoying or not necessary. Like I've said, I don't need a car where I live, and it would be more annoying to have a car and to try and drive to go even to the supermarket than it is just to walk there. And that ends up going for most things where I live, that it's just completely unnecessary to even drive, and or even to take a bike where I live would be more of a hassle than just walking there. But also in regards to travel and getting around, this is something that Italy has definitely changed my mindset towards going on public transportation. Growing up on the west coast of the United States, I never really went on a bus other than maybe a tourist bus, or maybe once or twice as a kid. And I'm not including school buses in this either, but like regular public transportation. In Italy, there's so many better connections, even in smaller cities or smaller areas. And I can think of a number of places that I lived in growing up on the West Coast that either it had no public transportation, or they just canceled the public transportation because it wasn't earning enough money and not enough people were taking it, or the little bit of public transportation that there was really horrible and just didn't get you to anywhere that you needed to go. I mean, even in one small town that I lived in, it really only just was a shuttle that went up and down the main street and really didn't go anywhere else. So unless you were like right in the thick of things, right in the center of the town, it almost didn't do you any good to begin with. But even in the small city where I live, there are a few bus lines that can get you to most places within the city, and a lot of bus stops are at least within a couple of minutes of where you need to get to. Sometimes they'll drop you right off in front of where you need to get to even. But also coming from that American perspective, I would have never thought to have taken public transportation other than maybe an airplane, because also trains just, there's not that many great connections and they can take forever back in the States, at least in the areas where I grew up on the West Coast. On the East Coast, there are definitely better connections there, but in Italy, things are very interconnected by the train lines, bus lines, and it's definitely made me reassess and rethink about taking that public transportation, bus, train, tram, metro. Some of these are amazing to get around depending on where you are. If there's not a metro, then there's a tram. Some cities have both a tram and a metro, or some places just have buses that get you around. And it really can make life so much easier. Of course, this is something that does exist in the United States, but it's nothing that was ever really so much a part of my life where I grew up. That's why it's changed my approach to even thinking about public transportation for getting around. But something else that definitely Italy has changed about me is maybe my likelihood of speaking up in a conversation or making my thoughts or opinions known on certain subjects, just because of my ability to express myself properly in another language. And this is one of the reasons why I'm always saying, of course, learn the language before you arrive in your country of choice, whether it's Italy, Pakistan, wherever it may be in the world. It's important to have the ability to express yourself, even if it's only minimally. But I will notice that even in social situations, maybe I'm not as outgoing just because of that language barrier, and that I don't feel like I can express myself in the same way. So that's something that's changed me a little bit. But even generally speaking, I'm a bit more of an introvert than an extrovert anyway. But even though I'm an introvert, I'm always willing to jump into a conversation and make my thoughts heard, or to give an opinion. That's never been an issue for me, especially if I'm around friends. But if I don't feel that comfort level of even the ability to express my thoughts, then I'm happier to be a little bit quieter. And of course, I am trying to improve my Italian skills. But I think even if I spent my whole life learning Italian and perfecting it, that I still might not be able to express myself just how I would in my own native language, because there is something about those words that you grow up with and how they connect to who you are. But even on that same point, there are certain emotions and feelings that we just have a difficult time expressing in English that are much more easy to express in another language, because maybe what could take a whole paragraph or a sentence or a whole book to explain in another language could just be a single word. Like maybe one of my favorite examples of this is the Brazilian word saudade, or saudade in Portugal. It basically means to miss something or miss somebody, but there's so much more emotion attached to it, and so much more of an idea that it requires explaining, this longing, this needing, this wanting, this desire for either that person or a thing, whatever it may be. And so there will be those times that maybe even there will be a word in English that is very easy for us to express, that in another language you need a paragraph or maybe even a couple words to explain this one simple idea. Because language is also not just about expressing yourself, but it's also the expression of the culture that has created it. Even kind of related to this idea with language and so on, there have been a number of times where maybe I've been in a supermarket or a store or a restaurant, and I have a question about something like an item on the shelf or something on the menu, and I've noticed that maybe after a long day that I'm just less willing to put up with kind of like pushing myself, especially if it's been like a really crazy day, that I don't want to have to think about trying to understand words in another language, or even if I don't have the words to ask the question that I want to ask, or that I know I won't understand the details because I just don't have those words. Maybe I'll be more likely to just kind of settle for something that I know works or that I know I like just because of that. So again, this is something that, yes, I could improve this, and there will be, I'm sure there's somebody who's watching this or listening to this right now and say, well, you should learn the language, just improve your language skills. And it's like, yeah, fine. Okay, done, happening. But when you're outside of your home country and your home language, there are those times when sometimes you just mentally aren't even in the space to try and make that effort. And even there have been times where I have known the subject matter and can speak on it pretty well in a foreign language, but just because of how long of a day it's been, or maybe I didn't get enough sleep, whatever it is, there will be those times where getting out another language can just not come to you. I've had days where I just can't speak in Italian or speak in Spanish or speak in Portuguese, whatever the other language is. There will be those times where I just can't get anything out other than English. But then I will have those other days where I can't even get out any English, just depending on what I've been around, who I've been around, the situations I've been in, especially with certain family members who don't speak English. And if I'm with them for a few days, my ability to speak English deteriorates even faster than normal. And it will take me a couple days to kind of get back into the rhythm of one language or the other. And for me, code switching is not one of the easiest things to do. Going from one language and then going into the other language is kind of like, it's kind of gears on a bike. You have to press the lever and wait for it to go and make sure that you're not switching gears too fast. But even there will be those times when I'm speaking in one language where I can't even think of the word in that language and can only think of another word in another language to express what I'm trying to say. There are even certain words for fruits and vegetables and foods that I'm more comfortable with in other languages than even in English, just because I ate them more outside of the United States than I ever did in the United States. Like pineapple, generally speaking, is one of the hardest words for me to try to even think of. I had to do a couple of takes before even getting this take out just to try to even remember that word, because the first word to me that would come out might be ananas, or even for me, depending on the size of the pineapple, there might be another word that might be more likely for me to use just depending on the situation. And there, like I said, there are certain things that in some languages you can just define better in that language than you can in another. But while we're on the topic of language and speaking, one other thing that Italy has definitely done to me has changed my willingness to strike up a conversation or even participate in a conversation with a complete stranger. Having that situation happen to me a number of times of somebody just striking up a conversation with me just randomly on the street or on public transport or whatever it is, definitely made that idea of conversing with someone who I don't know more normal. It kind of normalized it for me in some way. I mean, because growing up, especially where I grew up in the United States, I know not everywhere is like this, but the idea of somebody greeting you on the street saying hi, somebody you don't know, or being friendly with you that you don't know, it's like either one, something is wrong with them, or two, it's very old fashioned. And I know I had that happen to me, and it was very strange sometimes. Like, what? I don't know you. Why are you greeting me? Why are you saying hi to me? We don't know each other. But especially in smaller towns here in Italy, and I'm not saying this is everywhere, and I'm not saying even in a big city you'll necessarily find this, but I've had those situations where maybe just walking down a street, somebody will smile and say hello and greet you, or even strike up a conversation if you're waiting at a bus stop, or you're just somewhere kind of standing around together, doctor's office, whatever it may be. So it's been kind of a nice change to have a little bit more friendliness with strangers, and that's something that I think is really cool about Italian culture, just this outgoingness that they have, generally speaking. And I'm not even going to say like extroverted, but it's just that, hey, maybe you're in the same situation as somebody, and it's like, doesn't hurt to break the ice or to break the tension. And there have been times where I've had those really nice conversations in a situation that I never would have expected, just because I was in a certain place at a certain time that I know if I had been in another country in an equivalent situation would have never happened. Because generally speaking, Italians can be very curious about outsiders. And even though there are those times where there can be individuals who are a little skeptical of outsiders, there are also those times when they are very curious and inquisitive and wanting to know. And saying, hey, where are you from? How come you're here? Like, what was it that made you decide to come to my town? Because for many Italians, they're interested in going someplace else. And you could always say, like, it's that same mentality of the grass always kind of being greener on the other side, where people always are looking over to see what's over there when they might not realize what's on their home turf. And that definitely happens here. And there have been a lot of times where maybe I've been in a store and maybe they heard my accent or that I stumbled on a word or whatever it was. And they say, hey, where are you from? You speak Italian well, but like, I can tell it's not your first language. Where are you from? What are you doing here? And then you get into a 30, 40-minute conversation, or maybe you get an invite for dinner, or who knows what can happen. It's something that's always a lot of fun to have these interactions with Italians. And something that I have spoken about quite a few times is this slower pace of life in Italy, and having to adjust to that, especially coming from a faster paced life, can be a very big adjustment to make. Once you even start getting into it, then you can finally relax a little bit. But I know definitely that there have been those situations where I've been so used to things happening, like you call in the morning, it's done by the afternoon. But in Italy, maybe you got to wait a couple days for that same type of thing to happen, or even the patience that might be required when opening up a bank account. I know that some of you have been through these types of situations where it might take a couple of trips to the bank to even get them to say that, okay, you're finally finished with opening up the bank account. There are those times, of course, where it can be you just pop in, pop out. But I know more people who haven't had that than have had that type of situation. But to be able to just take that into your own life and just relax. Take the time necessary for something to be done, but not only that, but for it to be done well. And even though you may not always see this, but Italians do have pride in what they do, especially something that they create with their hands, or a creative project, or something that is from here that they have invested themselves into. If they want to do it, they want to make sure they do it right, and they want to make sure that they take that time to give the attention necessary to whatever it might be that they're doing. Of course, everywhere you go, you might find people that are just kind of taking things slow just because they can, and Italy's no stranger to that either. But in Italy, it's also part of the culture to take that pride and to be able to say, hey, look, this is what I've done. I'm proud of it, and I want you to enjoy it. But anyway, I think this is a great place to round out this episode. And if you're interested in hearing or seeing more about Italian life, Italian dual citizenship, and living life abroad, be sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael di Furia, or that you're subscribed to Not Your Average Globetrotter on your favorite podcasting app. And if you're on YouTube, be sure to leave a like and maybe let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Maybe has there been something that you've experienced in Italy that has changed you, even if you've only been here on vacation? Or if you're on Apple Podcasts, if you could leave a 5-star review, and maybe if you've enjoyed these videos, leave a review to let me know. And of course, a huge thank you to the monthly patrons who help to make content like this possible on a monthly basis. Thank you all so much. And also, of course, be sure to mark down March 2nd, 2021 on your calendars for the new project that I will be launching both here on YouTube, and also for the first episode, there will be that audio exclusive content that I've mentioned on the community page here on YouTube or on my social media, that there will be the first episode that has some content that might not be so YouTube friendly. So be sure that you're also following me or subscribed on your favorite podcasting app so that you can check that out as soon as it comes out. But of course, as always, I am Rafael di Furia. Thank you for joining me on another Friday night for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. I look forward to seeing you all next time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you all next time. Later.